A black man enters the courtroom in handcuffs, silently dignified. The judge smirks until recognition begins to dawn. But before that, the bailiff throws out a slur that echoes across the wood-paneled silence, triggering something deeper than shame, something buried, something forgotten. You people always end up here. The bailiff didn't whisper it. His voice cut through the mahogany courtroom like a rusty knife, loud enough that even the court clerk froze mid-typing. Everyone. The defendant stood still, his wrists cuffed in front of him, his steps measured, deliberate. He didn't react, not with words, not with his eyes. That calm expression held, unbothered, untouched. The courtroom was still, waking up 10 minutes before the judge's entrance. A few attorneys shuffled papers, a couple of officers leaned against the wall chatting about sports, and one public defender scrolled her phone. Normal morning. Except now, it wasn't. The man in handcuffs looked different. Not because of what he wore, orange jumpsuit, worn-down boots, but because of how he stood. Like this room didn't own him. Like the cold metal around his wrists was beneath him. A few jurors, summoned early, sat along the back wall. One whispered to another, "He looks familiar." From the side door, footsteps. The judge entered, gavel down. Court is now in session. State of Illinois versus. She paused. Her voice faltered. Then she looked up. And for the first time in her 10 years wearing the robe, the Honorable Judge Carolyn Dorsey lost her breath mid-sentence. The man standing before her wasn't just another case file, wasn't just another repeat offender. He was David Ellison. David. The boy who walked her home from elementary school when her shoes broke. The boy who gave her half his sandwich on the day her dad forgot to pack lunch. The boy who disappeared after 7th grade, just vanished. He was taller now, muscular, a shadow of the kid she remembered. But the eyes, the eyes were still the same, and they were looking straight at her. No recognition. No smile, just silence. She looked down quickly. Her fingers gripped the bench edge. The bailiff stepped forward to read the charges. David Ellison, age 36, charged with felony assault, resisting arrest, and destruction of city property. Objection. Came a voice, sharp as glass. It was the defense attorney, barely hiding her disgust. Your Honor, we've already filed motion to dismiss on 2 of those counts. The arrest was initiated without a warrant, and enough, Judge Dorsey snapped. Her voice cracked again. Bring him forward. David stepped up. The chains rattled like dry bones. The judge stared at the file. But she wasn't reading. She was remembering. A bike ride down Carlton Street. A snowball fight in 2nd grade. The time she scraped her knee and David tore off his own shirt sleeve to stop the bleeding. How did you end up here? She whispered, not meaning to say it aloud, but he heard. Everyone heard. David looked her straight in the eye. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. I didn't end up here. I was brought here. Then he turned, slowly, to face the courtroom. Served 10 years in the military. Came back with honor medals. Couldn't get a job with my record. Couldn't rent an apartment because I checked a box. Got pulled over in my own neighborhood last week and asked if I stole my own car. I didn't end up here. I survived on my way to this room. He paused. Then I looked at her again. And if you still remember who I am, Carolyn, you'll know I've never raised my hand in violence. Not once. Her lips trembled. Gasps scattered in the gallery. One of the jurors sat upright, hand over mouth. Another whispered, did he just say her name? The bailiff stepped forward. Tense. Judge Dorsey stood up slowly. I need a 10-minute recess. Gavel slammed. She exited fast, too fast, and David? He just stood there, calm, as if the world had shifted beneath them all, and he was still the only one standing on solid ground. The hallway outside, Courtroom 3B was quiet except for the judge's heels tapping erratically as she paced out. Her hands trembled. She wasn't supposed to feel like this, not anymore. Not since she'd earned that robe, climbed those stone steps every morning, and silenced emotion into discipline. But David's face cracked the mask. She leaned against the wall, eyes shut tight. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Back then, he had saved her. She was 12. Walking home through the broken end of Pulaski Park, a man had stepped out of a rusted truck. Words she didn't understand yet, eyes that followed too long. She remembered stumbling. A scream, and then David, all limbs and fury, throwing himself between them, screaming so loud it shook the trees. The man fled. Her mom had called David a blessing. The cops never came. But Carolyn never forgot, until she did, until law school. Clerkships. Names replaced faces. Justice became a process, not a person. Now he was back-chained, charged, and accused. And it was her court. What am I supposed to do? Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Something unspoken buzzed between the walls. Even the fluorescent lights seemed dimmer. David stood quietly near the defense table, his hands no longer shaking, still cuffed. But he stood tall. The young public defender beside him leaned in. You really know the judge? He didn't answer, but across the aisle, an older officer, Sergeant Stripes, faded, stared hard. His lips moved, mouthing the name again. David Ellison? He stood slowly, whispering to another officer. That name's not a joke. He's the guy from Fort Ridley. The one with the intel op in '09. The second cop blinked. Wait, the ghost? The one who disappeared after saving 3 squads in Kandahar. He was classified for years. Now the room felt colder. The whispers spread faster than fire on dry grass. A courtroom intern who'd been bored moments ago was now frantically searching her phone. Headlines flickered across the screen. Black Ops Marine found not guilty in civilian assault. Silent hero or target. David Ellison, the name the Army won't talk about. The bailiff who'd made the racist comment earlier now stood rigid, jaw tight, pretending not to listen. But his ears burned red. And David? Still unmoved. But in his eyes, the silence was over. Judge Dorsey returned 10 minutes later. But everything had changed. Her robe flowed behind her like a cape. But the weight on her shoulders was heavier than it had ever been. She sat, took a slow breath, picked up the gavel. This court will resume proceedings. Her voice steadied. Barely, but David spoke first. Before we continue, he said, calmly, I want the comment made by the court officer acknowledged. The bailiff froze. Judge Dorsey hesitated. The air tightened. She should have ignored it. Moved on, but her voice betrayed her instinct. Officer Daniels, she said, her gaze sharp. Did you or did you not say you people always end up here? Daniels swallowed hard. I was referring to repeat offenders, Your Honor. That's not what I asked. Silence. David didn't flinch. The courtroom collectively held its breath. I'll address the court's internal investigation process after this hearing, Dorsey said quietly. For now it's on record. But in that moment, everyone understood something. Deeper was cracking. The old courtroom silence had a leak now, and the truth was pouring through. As the prosecutor stood to speak. The sergeant in the back whispered, We just messed with the wrong man. She unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the delicate creases. The ink had faded, but the words still echoed like they were carved into her memory. I'll come back when I'm stronger. So you don't have to be afraid anymore. Caroline blinked. The letters blurred. Back then, it felt like a goodbye. A final sentence before silence, but now, it felt like a promise he'd kept. The knock on her chamber door startled her. It was her clerk, young, nervous. Ma'am, she said, eyes flicking to the paper in her hand. You're being requested in court. Something's happening. Carolyn didn't ask. She folded the note with the reverence of something sacred and slid it into her sleeve. The courtroom was louder than before, energy buzzing, officers stiff, and the gallery alive with suppressed murmurs. The prosecutor had arrived, briefcase in hand, a smile too wide for a man in front of a storm. Let's proceed, Caroline said firmly, taking her seat. The prosecution began its opening. They tried. They painted David Ellison as dangerous, temperamental, and a threat. Words were chosen to lean just short of angry black man. No one said it, but the implication dripped off every sentence like oil, and when the officers approached, the defendant responded with aggression, resisting lawful detainment, which resulted in David finally moved, not with anger, but with a smile. It was quiet, measured. Enough to unnerve the prosecution. Enough to make the gallery sit up straighter. Judge Dorsey saw it too. Is there something you'd like to clarify, Mr. Ellison? She asked, holding his gaze. Yes, Your Honor, David said, voice smooth like steel cooling under pressure. I'd like to submit a statement. Brief, factual. The prosecutor scoffed. Objection, Your Honor. Overruled, Dorsey said before he could finish. Proceed. David stood. And every eye turned. I was parked in front of my apartment, he said. I had just returned from physical therapy. I was in uniform pants because my leg brace digs into denim. That's when the officers approached. He paused, let the words land. They didn't ask for ID. They didn't ask where I lived. They ordered me out. I complied. One recognized my name and the mood changed. He said he read something once about Fort Ridley. I remained calm. Then the other officer called for backup and told me to stop flexing my war hero muscles. That's when they tried to cuff me. I asked to speak to a superior. A beat. They tackled me to the ground. Gasps. Silent shock. Even the prosecutor fumbled his pen. David turned toward the jury box slowly. Most of you wouldn't know Fort Ridley. That's okay. It was a ghost site. No press. No honors. But I was there. Saved a dozen lives under direct fire. Lost 2 men. I came home a different person. I still don't sleep right. But what hurts most? It's not the nightmares. It's being treated like I don't belong in the country I bled for. He sat down. And the courtroom utterly still. Judge Dorsey took a slow breath. Her hands were clenched below the bench. Number. One saw, but her voice, when she finally spoke, was firmer than steel. Thank you, Mr. Ellison. The court acknowledges your statement and will weigh it during proceedings. The prosecutor tried to recover. We request a recess to confirm. The defendant's claims about military status. Too late, murmured a voice in the gallery. Phones were already lighting up. One person had pulled up a public document recently declassified. A Pentagon citation. A redacted transcript. Headline after headline. Decorated vet faces court after alleged assault, but police version begins to unravel. Judge overseeing. Case had personal history with defendant, sources say ties go deep. And then, one image leaked. David in uniform, standing at a memorial wall, saluting. Tears streamed down his cheek. The courtroom would never be the same again. David sat motionless, not defeated, centered. The chain still looped around his wrists, but somehow it no longer looked like restraint. It looked ceremonial, like the cuffs were part of a deeper story now. When the whole courtroom had begun to recognize. Outside, reporters had begun gathering. Inside, the gallery filled with more than just curious citizens. Off-duty soldiers, local activists, even a retired judge quietly took a back row seat. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was something else now. A mirror. Judge Dorsey scanned the courtroom. Everything felt heavier today. The sunlight pouring Through the stained glass windows lit the dust in the air, tiny golden motes dancing in slow spirals. Like memories made visible, the prosecutor tried to regain footing. Your Honor, we request that the defendant's military record not bias the facts of the case. This is about conduct, not history. David didn't even blink, but the moment hung awkwardly. Bias? The room almost laughed. The bias was in the cuffs. The accusations. The assumptions made before anyone asked a question. Your Honor. David's attorney stood, eyes burning now. The state wants to separate who Mr. Ellison is from what happened, but they're inseparable. His identity is the very reason. He's here. His treatment is proof. Dorsey nodded once, slow, acknowledging without agreeing. Then she asked, Mr. Ellison, do you wish to submit character witnesses? He looked at her, really looked at her. A long pause. Yes, he said finally, but only one. You. The courtroom broke into whispers. Dorsey stiffened. I am not a witness. I am the presiding judge. I understand, David said calmly. But you're also the only one here who knows who I was before the world decided I was a threat. Her jaw tensed. May I speak to the court without defense counsel? He asked, eyes steady. After a long pause, she nodded. The prosecutor objected. Overruled. David stood. I want to make something clear, he began, voice low but strong. I didn't come here to ask for sympathy. I came here to make people remember. He stepped forward, just enough for the jury to feel his presence. I was 12 when I learned silence is survival. I was 17 when I learned the military gave uniforms faster than justice gave second chances. I've worn a dozen labels: soldier, hero, suspect, threat. A beat, but there's one I never forgot: friend. Now he turned toward the judge. When I left that note for you, Caroline, I meant it. I really thought coming back stronger meant medals, scars, years of silence, but I was wrong. A pause. Coming back stronger means standing here, speaking anyway, even when no one wants to listen, even when your hands are cuffed. The courtroom didn't move. Not even the air seemed to shift. Dorsey's throat burned. She'd sat through hundreds of trials, read thousands of case files, delivered verdicts like stone tablets. But this wasn't the case anymore. This was her reckoning, and the photo in her drawer burned like fire behind her eyelids. Don't forget me. She hadn't. She tried. But he came back stronger than anyone ever expected. Court will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments, she said, rising. Her voice trembled, but only once. David nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. As the guards approached to lead him away, something subtle changed. The older officer, Sergeant Walker, stepped forward. Instead of taking David's arm, he walked beside him. No hand on the elbow. No force. Just respect. And for the first time, the chain didn't clink as loud. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed before the doors even opened. Reporters, community, leaders, even a city councilman pretending to observe quietly. It was no longer a local trial. It had become a symbol. 2 officers stood at the steps with arms crossed, murmuring, if this thing blows up on national news, heads will roll. But inside, the air was different, more serious, more tense. Judge Dorsey entered from her chambers with deliberate steps. Her robe felt heavier today, as if justice itself was testing her shoulders. David was already seated. No cuffs this time. The bailiff's hands twitched, but he didn't speak. His mouth is still raw from yesterday's internal review meeting. Word was spreading fast. Officer. Daniels might not keep his badge. Court is now in session, Dorsey said, steady but pale. We will hear closing arguments. The prosecutor stood, slick, polished. His suit looked more expensive today. Probably prepped for the cameras. Ladies. "And gentlemen of the jury," he began, walking slowly, "we all respect military service. We do, but heroism on a battlefield doesn't erase accountability back home." He pointed slightly toward David. "This is a man with a record. This is a man who resisted law enforcement. This is a man who believes his past gives him immunity from present behavior." His voice softened just enough to seem fair. "This isn't about race. This isn't about uniform. This is about actions, consequences, order." He sat down like he'd dropped the mic, and for a second, a few jurors nodded until David's liar stood. Amira Blake. She looked younger than most in the room, but her words carried weight like stone. "This isn't about race," she repeated. Slowly. "They always say that, don't they? It's always about actions, never about systems. Never about the officer who saw a black man in military pants and assumed stolen valor. Never about the neighborhood where he can't rent, the job he can't keep, the ID he's asked to show on his own street." She stepped closer. "You want to talk about records?" Her eyes narrowed. "David has one, not a criminal one, a decorated one. Medals, missions, scars that no court transcript lists." She turned to the jury. "And yet, when he stood quietly, calmly, and asked for a supervisor, he was thrown to the ground, tackled, cuffed, accused." Her voice dropped low, dangerous. "You want to know what's really on trial here? The myth of neutrality. The idea that this courtroom is separate from the world outside. That justice floats above it all, untouched by fear or bias." She paused, walking directly in front of them now. "But you and I both know that's not true." A silence. Even Judge Dorsey didn't blink. "We're not here to decide if David's a saint. We're here to decide if the system should get to destroy someone quietly and walk away clean." She said, and the silence afterward was louder than the argument. In the back of the room, someone stood up, slowly, quietly, saluted. A second followed. 3 men in civilian clothes, each with quiet, military posture, lifted hands to their temples. "Veterans." David didn't look back. He didn't need to. He felt it. Outside the courtroom, protest signs began rising. "He protected us. Now we protect him. System error. Humanity not found." Judge Dorsey watched it all unfold, her gavel frozen in hand. She knew tomorrow would bring the verdict, but she also knew something bigger was already happening. The trial might end in a sentence, but the story? The story had just begun. The jury door closed. 12 people locked away with one question that felt heavier than any file they'd read. Inside the main courtroom, silence settled like dust. Judge Dorsey remained seated, fingers steepled beneath her chin. The photo from the envelope burned in her pocket like a coal she couldn't let go. David sat beside Amira. He looked tired. Not physically, spiritually, like someone who had run a marathon through fire and now stood waiting at the finish line, unsure if a bullet was next instead of applause. Outside, the street had changed. Barricades had been brought in. Reporters swarmed. Chants echoed from down the block. "Ellison deserved better. We see you, Judge Dorsey. He fought for us, now we fight for him." Dorsey could hear it through the glass. The prosecutor sat rigid, scrolling his phone over and over. No press hits. Not yet. No one was praising his angle, and he knew a dot in the jury room. Tension thickened fast. A woman in her 40s, juror number 5, flipped through the evidence file again. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered. They escalated before even checking his ID. But he resisted, an older man grumbled. Resisted what? A younger juror snapped. Getting thrown on the ground for standing still? That's not resisting. That's surviving. A tall man near the end nodded. My brother served. You don't come back from that clean. You come back haunted. And instead of support, he got suspicion. Just like this, they argued. They reasoned, but slowly, something shifted. It wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about who gets to be innocent. Hours passed. Judge Dorsey recessed the courtroom but didn't leave the bench. David's attorney paced the aisle. The prosecutor left to take a call. Came back 10 minutes later, red in the face. David closed his eyes. His mind wandered to a desert-hot, bright, violent. He remembered dragging a bleeding friend under a broken wall. He remembered praying to nothing at all. He never imagined his worst battle would be fought in silence, in a courtroom with nothing but truth. The doors opened. The jury returned. He didn't look at them. Not at first. The foreperson handed a slip of paper to the bailiff, who passed it up to Judge Dorsey. Her hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. She read the paper. Then I looked at David, looked at the jury, looked at the empty silence between them all. She handed it back. I've received the verdict, she said. The courtroom held its breath, but before she read it aloud, phone went off. Everyone turned. The prosecutor's phone. He silenced it quickly, but the screen had flashed. Governor's office requesting immediate statement on Ellison case. He went pale. Dorsey's eyes narrowed. She reached for the gavel but paused. Because at that moment, David finally turned to face the jury. And his eyes didn't ask for mercy. They asked for the truth, whether they had it or not. He had already won something. He had made them see. Judge Dorsey stared at the words again. Make this right. They were handwritten. Not by the jury, at least not officially, but the message was clear. Even the system's own mechanisms couldn't hide what the people in that room were feeling. She looked up. The jurors were motionless. The room itself felt airless. 100 people breathing at half capacity. David didn't blink, didn't shift. The bailiff adjusted his stance, hand near the holster, a habit. But now it looked more like fear than procedure. Dorsey's voice rang out firm and steady. In the case of the state of Illinois versus David Ellison, a pause that felt like thunder held in a breath. We found the defendant. She glanced once at the jury foreperson. Not guilty on all counts. The sound that followed was not applause. It was a relief. The kind that breaks barriers in the chest. Like tension cracking open, letting light in, the gallery exhaled. Some wept. Others didn't even move, paralyzed by disbelief that the system could get it right. Even once, David closed his eyes. He didn't smile. He just breathed. Slow, quiet. Like a soldier stepping into sunlight for the first time after war. Amira touched his arm lightly. You're free, she whispered. He didn't say thank you, didn't cheer. Just nodded like the truth didn't need celebration. Just acknowledgement. The prosecutor sat motionless, jaw tight. His hands clenched around a pen until the plastic cracked. But he said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Judge Dorsey tapped the gavel gently. This court is adjourned. She stood. Her robe moved like a curtain falling at the end of a long, brutal play. But the audience wasn't leaving. Outside, the protest erupted into a celebration. People hugged. Raised fists, cameras flashed. News anchors shouted over each other to get the words out first. Verdict, not guilty. Veteran cleared. David Ellison walks free. Judge who knew defendant from childhood presides over case and stands by him. Inside the courthouse, David didn't head for the exit. Not yet. Instead, he turned toward the bench and waited. Judge Dorsey paused at the steps. Their eyes met. For the first time since they were children, she truly saw him not as a defendant or a headline or a ghost from her past, but as the boy who once shielded her with his bare arms and never asked for anything in return. And maybe as the man who just taught her what justice should feel like. She stepped down slowly. People watched. She walked toward him, stopping just a breath away. "Sorry," she said softly, so only he could hear. He didn't answer right away. Then gently, "You remembered me." "I never really forgot," she whispered. He nodded. Then walked out the side door. No handcuffs. No escort. Just a man, carrying years of silence and leaving something heavy behind. The morning after the verdict, every news outlet carried David's photo. Front pages, home pages, social feeds. His face, half shadowed, half lit, had become more than just a man. He had become a mirror. And every institution in the city was now scrambling to adjust what it saw in the reflection. But David wasn't celebrating. He didn't attend interviews. He didn't stand on the courthouse steps. He vanished. Not into hiding. Into action. 3 days later, a grainy photo surfaced of him outside Cook County Jail. Then another meeting with civil rights attorneys. Then a video. David shaking hands with the sister of a man wrongly imprisoned for over a decade. The caption read, "He's not done." In her chambers, Judge Dorsey sat surrounded by silence. Her inbox was full of commendations from law groups. Her voicemail was flooded with both hate and praise. The chief judge's office had sent her flowers, but none of it meant anything compared to what she now held in her hands: a letter. Torn edges. No return address. Inside, "They put me away for a fight I didn't start. 4 years ago. No weapon. No injury. Just a neighborhood I didn't belong in. David said you'd listen. That you knew how to hear things others couldn't. So I'm writing, even if nothing changes. I just want someone to read this who still believes people like me matter." She stared at it for a long time, then folded it, slid it next to the photo of her and David under the oak tree. She was no longer just a judge. She was now a crack in the wall, a crack through which light had started leaking. At a quiet apartment on the south side, David sat at a wooden table covered in case files. No security, no cameras. Just names, names. The world had forgotten. He moved through them like a man with a mission. Because he was. A soft knock at the door. He opened it to find Amira. "You really weren't kidding," she said with a half smile. "You're already doing the work." "I said I came back to be stronger," he replied. "This is what stronger looks like." She stepped inside. They sifted through file after file-stained pages, missing paperwork, transcripts that didn't add up. Then she paused. "Hold one up. This one? This guy? This could have been you." Almost identical charges. David scanned it, then reached for his phone. "Judge Dorsey," he said into the receiver when she answered. "I need you to look at something." That night, Dorsey sat on her bed, reading the case David had sent. The ink was smeared. The words repeated: loitering, suspicious behavior, unknown object in pocket, no weapon, no threat, no crime. And yet the sentence was 4 years. 4 years erased from a young man's life. She reached for her notebook and began drafting a memo to the Innocence Committee. No fanfare. No spotlight. Just justice, quiet and steady. Back at David's apartment, Amira closed another folder. "They're gonna come for you, you know." David didn't look up. "I'm counting on it," he said. "You want to fight?" She asked. "No," he said calmly. "I want the system to stop pretending it's not already at war with people like me." David stared at the screen long after the call ended. Block number. Digitally masked voice. But the message wasn't subtle. "Stop digging or we bury what's left of you." He didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled open the drawer where he kept the worn-down external drive military issue. It looked like nothing. A scratched chunk of metal and rubber, but inside it, files he wasn't supposed to have. Files he had pulled from his final deployment. Things he swore he'd bury. Until now, he inserted it into his laptop. A password prompt. Blink. He typed it slowly, Caroline. The files unlocked. He scrolled through folder after folder until he found it, marked only Chicago Civilians flagged. He clicked names, photos, annotations in cold, bureaucratic text. Individuals. Do not match area demographic monitor. Known to challenge traffic stops, record interactions. Family history. Prior arrests unconfirmed. Loyalty. David's stomach twisted. It wasn't just arrest records. They were target lists. Built off bias. Used by departments across the country. And somehow, one of the original databases had started right here. In this city. That same morning, Judge Dorsey sat in her chambers reading a front-page headline. Judge's history with defendant. Calls trial into question. Subheadline. Did she let friendship override facts? She closed the paper slowly. So it had begun. The system was trying to turn her into the problem now. Twist the narrative. Make her judgment look like bias rather than bravery. Her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous tip. Another veiled threat. We know who you were. You'll lose that robe. She smiled bitterly. They didn't understand. That robe wasn't her armor anymore. The truth was, David and Amira brought the files to a journalist the next day. Not just any journalist, Valeria Cortez, the one who'd spent a decade trying to expose the underbelly of city policing. The one whose FOIA requests were denied so often she made it an art form. She flipped through the files with wide eyes. This is it, she whispered. The thread that unravels the whole damn thing. But you publish it, David said. You're going to need protection. I've needed protection since the day I printed my first story about missing black teens. This? She smiled. This is what I've been waiting for. That night, the story went live. Leaked database reveals systemic civilian targeting. Military source confirms origin. Screenshots. Quotes. Redacted memos. The entire city blinked awake. Suddenly it wasn't about David anymore. It was about the city. The system. The rot beneath the badge. Protests surged again, this time not just for Ellison, but for every forgotten name in those files. And inside her home, Judge Dorsey sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, watching the city rumble like an engine restarting. Then her phone lit up. David. She answered. They're going to try and make you the story now, he said. They already are. You scared? She looked out the window. Sirens, lights, movement. Not anymore. The next morning, Dorsey received a formal summons. A review panel. Ethics board. Possible suspension. The letter had one line underlined, conflict of interest, and breach of judicial neutrality. But instead of shaking, she folded the letter, stood tall, and said aloud, Good, let them try. At the same moment, in a quiet underground server farm, a security tech flagged an unusual login, a backup of the files David leaked. Sent to 10 different inboxes. Journalists, lawyers, whistleblower groups. It had already spread. And now, no one could stop it. 3 weeks later, Chicago looked different. The streets still buzzed with life, but now, truth hummed underneath. Billboards had gone up showing David's face beside the words, Truth survived. So will we. Protests had turned into organizing groups. City council hearings had turned into legislation drafts. The court system had been flipped inside out, and the files David leaked? They were now publicly SEARCHABLE. Each name, once quietly flagged, now carried a voice. One by one, old convictions were being reopened. Inside the state capitol, Judge Carolyn Dorsey sat before the Judicial Review Board, all 6 members in stiff suits, staring down like gods on thrones. One leaned forward. You admit to knowing the defendant personally? From childhood. I do. And still chose to preside? I disclosed it. The prosecution did not object. You allowed him to speak outside standard testimony. I allowed a man. The dignity this court system never gave him. A pause. And you believe that was justice? She met their gaze. I believe that was finally justice. Gasps echoed. Whispers. The courtroom doors opened slightly. Someone walked in. David wearing a plain black shirt, jeans, and his military dog tags, silent, watching. Later that night, the review panel announced their decision. Judge Carolyn Dorsey. Fully reinstated. The board finds that her actions, while unconventional, were driven by transparency, fairness, and the integrity of justice. We recommend her methods as a model, not a mistake. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. How do you feel, Judge Dorsey? Would you do it again? Is David Ellison a hero? She raised one hand for silence. I'm not the story, she said. The story is what happens when we finally stop pretending the system works for everyone. And with that, she walked. Past the microphones. David stood waiting at the end of the stairs. They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They just nodded. The kind of nod two people share when the world has tried to erase them, but failed. In the weeks that followed, a Handes. Small team formed around David and Amira, lawyers, activists, students. They began working case by case. Not with fury, but with precision. They called it the Reckoning Project. And soon, stories flooded in. A mother wrongfully charged in a shoplifting case is now freed. Veteran falsely accused of trespassing welcomed home with a city apology. A 16-year-old. Boy flagged for nothing more than wearing the wrong hoodie had his case dismissed before it even reached court. Back at Pulaski Park, under the same old oak tree, Judge Dorsey sat on a worn wooden bench. David approached slowly, hands in his pockets. I didn't think you'd come back here, he said. Didn't think I could. She replied. Silence. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She handed it to him. He unwrapped it slowly. It was the photo, the one from years ago. The one from the envelope. Now in a frame, etched with 4 words. Don't forget me again. He stared at it for a long time, then placed it at the base of the tree. No one will, he said quietly. Later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Dorsey stood beside him and asked, Do you think we actually changed anything? David exhaled. We didn't change the world, he said. We just changed who gets hurt inside it.